I was rinsing coffee cups in the kitchen of my childhood home in Durham, North Carolina, when my father spoke as if he were reading a memo he wished someone else would deliver. "Your sister Sophie is uncomfortable with all the attention you're getting. I don't think I should be the one to escort you to the altar." For a beat, the faucet hissed louder than his words. 2 weeks before my wedding, Martin Carter. My father had chosen my sister's envy over my moment. I set the cup in the rack and forced myself to breathe. "What are you actually saying?" I asked. He shifted in his chair and studied a scratch in the table. "Sophie's had a rough time. She feels overshadowed. I need to support her." And as my father, I said evenly, "You don't need to support me." He didn't answer. The silence put a frame around everything he wouldn't say. My name is Amelia Carter, and I've spent years building a life that didn't ask for permission. A steady career in marketing a partner I love, and until 5 minutes ago, the picture of a wedding day where my dad would take my arm at the nave and we'd walk together toward the future. But I grew up knowing that in our house, love often arrived with conditions. When my mother died, the light in our family dimmed. When Sophie was born 5 years later, my father poured what remained into the new flame and never noticed how cold the rest of the rooms had become. There was someone, though, who kept my side of the house warm. Edward Whitmore, my mother's father, moved in after the funeral. He taught me to lace my cleats and change a tire. He clapped at school plays and sat through rainy soccer games. He knew I picked mushrooms out of pizza and that thunderstorms sent me to the hallway with a blanket and a book. If my father was the sometimes present figure in photographs, Edward was the person behind the camera, always there. The faucet drip ticked like a small clock. I looked at my father, tired, cautious, avoiding my eyes, and felt something inside me settle into place. I would not bargain for dignity. If Martin didn't want to walk me to the altar, the man who had earned that honor would. "I hear you," I said, my voice calm. "Thank you for the clarity." He blinked, surprised that I wasn't pleading. Maybe he expected me to promise I'd make myself smaller, so Sophie could feel taller. I wiped my hands on a towel, left the kitchen, and walked down the familiar hallway that still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. "Come in, sweetheart." Edward called before I could knock. He was in his armchair by the window, a history biography open on his lap, glasses low on his nose. At 82, he had slowed a touch, but his gaze remained quick and kind. "Granddad," I said, sitting on the ottoman, "I need to ask you something important." He set the book aside. "Anything. Will you escort me to the altar?" He frowned, not in refusal, but in concern. "I thought Martin was doing that." "He decided Sophie's comfort matters more," I said. I didn't trust my voice with extra words. A brief, fierce light crossed his face. "My girl," he said gently. "Some jobs are titles. Some are duties. I have never needed a title to do my duty to you." I laughed and cried at once. "So that's a yes." It would be my greatest honor. We held hands for a long moment. The old grief I'd carried like a folded letter softened at the edges. Choosing Edward wasn't a punishment. It was a truth finally spoken out loud. Footsteps sounded in the hall. My father paused in the doorway, reading the scene with dawning understanding. The linked hands, the open book, the calm in my shoulders. "What's this?" he asked. I stood. "Granddad will take me to the altar." He looked to Edward, then back to me, and for the first time that afternoon he met my eyes. A protest gathered on his tongue, then thinned into a silence he couldn't fill. Outside, a wind moved through the maple leaves. Inside, the decision set like concrete. The house felt different after that afternoon. The air seemed charged like a thunderstorm waiting just beyond the horizon. My father tried to return to ordinary conversations about work, about the price of groceries, about the leaves clogging the gutters, but each exchange landed with the weight of what had been said in the kitchen. He had withdrawn his claim to a father's place on my wedding day, and in doing so, he had also exposed every fault line in our family. For the next several days, the house was a minefield. Sophie called twice a day, sometimes speaking to me, more often to my father, and every time I overheard her voice, it was sharp with accusation. How could Amelia do this to me? How could you let her take the spotlight like that? I didn't need to hear every word to know the gist. Sophie's resentment was a river that had been flowing underground for years, and now it had broken the surface. On the third evening, after I asked Edward to escort me, my father cornered me in the den. He waited until Edward was asleep upstairs and the television was playing low. He chose a moment he thought he could control. Amelia. He began folding his hands in that way he did when he wanted to sound reasonable. I've been thinking. Maybe I overreacted. Weddings. They bring out emotions. Your sister was upset and I wanted to keep peace, but I shouldn't have said I wouldn't walk you. I looked at him. His tone was conciliatory, but his eyes flicked sideways, unwilling to hold mine for long. You didn't just say it, I replied. You meant it. You decided Sophie's feelings were more important than mine. That's not fair, he said quickly. I was trying to balance things. Balance. My voice sharpened despite myself. My wedding day isn't a math equation, Dad. It's supposed to be about love and support. You chose not to give me either. He winced, then shifted tactics. I'm your father. It's my right to walk you down that aisle. I held my breath, then exhaled slowly. Rights aren't automatic. They're earned. Granddad earned that right. The conversation ended there with silence thick enough to suffocate. He tried again the next day, and the day after, changing his strategy each time. First guilt reminding me of the roof he had kept over my head, then anger accusing me of dishonoring him. Finally, bribery, offering to pay for extra flowers, for a string quartet, for whatever detail he thought might tempt me. But each attempt only confirmed the same truth: he wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for what it cost him. While my father flailed, Edward became my anchor. Once he had agreed, he approached the role with the kind of determination that had carried him through a lifetime of responsibility. He ordered a new Navy suit, joking that if he was going to upstage his son-in-law, he might as well look the part. He scheduled an appointment with his doctor to confirm he could manage the walk. He even practiced in the hallway, counting his steps from door to door while holding a ruler in place of a cane. I watched him with tears in my eyes more than once. At 82, every step cost him something, but he treated it as a sacred duty. I want everything perfect for you, my dear, he said one evening after practice. Not just good enough. Perfect. It already is perfect, I told him, because it's you. His smile that night carried the warmth of decades, the quiet reassurance that I wasn't asking too much. He had always known how to make me feel wanted, and he was proving it again in ways that words couldn't touch. Meanwhile, Sophie's calls grew louder, more desperate. She had mastered the art of making herself the center of every conversation, and now she weaponized it with skill. You're destroying this family? She shouted over the phone one night, her voice tinny but cutting. Dad is heartbroken. Do you even care what this is doing to him? I pressed the phone against my shoulder and stared out the kitchen window at the yard where Sophie and I had once played tag. Dad made his choice, I answered. I'm just living with the consequences. You're being selfish, vindictive. No, I said, I'm being honest for the first time. The silence on the line was colder than any insult. When she hung up, I felt the final thread between us snap. We weren't just sisters caught in rivalry. We had become opponents in a battle neither of us had chosen, but both of us had fueled. 3 days later, Edward and I met with Reverend Matthews, who would officiate the ceremony at St. Andrew's Church. The church smelled faintly of old wood and hymnals, and sunlight streamed through colored glass onto the pews. It was the place where my mother had been memorialized, where my faith had faltered and been rekindled, and where my future would begin. Reverend, I said. After we reviewed the standard order of service, I'd like to add something. He raised an eyebrow. Patient and curious. Of course, Amelia. What do you have in mind? When you introduced the person escorting me, I explained. I'd like you to say Mr. Edward Whitmore, Amelia's beloved grandfather and the father figure who raised her with unconditional love. The words hung in the air like a bell toll. Edward squeezed my hand, his eyes wet. You don't need to do that, he whispered. I do, I replied. Because it's true. The Reverend smiled warmly. I think that's beautiful, and entirely appropriate. For the first time since my father's betrayal, I felt something stronger than pain anticipation. The ceremony would not just be a wedding, it would be a declaration of truth. The days blurred into a rhythm of checklists and rehearsals fittings and phone calls. But in the quiet mornings, Edward and I shared rituals that grounded us. He brewed coffee exactly the way I liked, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and carried it to me with the steadiness of someone determined to shoulder a burden for as long as he could. We practiced walking side by side in the narrow living room, me in flats, him in his polished shoes. Each step felt symbolic, as though we were rehearsing not just for a ceremony, but for the rewriting of family history. My father would be there, of course, sitting among the guests. He might seethe, he might sulk, he might even cry, but the sight of Edward by my side would speak louder than any of his excuses. Word traveled quickly through the extended family. My Aunt Margaret called to say she thought the decision was long overdue. My cousins sent messages of support. Even family friends who had known us since childhood quietly admitted that Edward had always been the true father figure in my life. Each endorsement strengthened my resolve, yet not everyone was supportive. A few relatives hinted that I was humiliating my father unnecessarily, that weddings should heal wounds rather than expose them. I listened politely, then let their words fall away. They hadn't lived through the small betrayals, the moments when Sophie's needs eclipsed my own, the years of silence where love should have been. They couldn't understand. But I did. And so did Edward. One evening a week before the wedding, I found my father waiting in the driveway when I came home. The porch light cast shadows across his face, making him look older than I remembered. "I can't believe you're going through with this," he said flatly. "I can," I answered. "You're making me look like a fool." "You did that yourself, Dad." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The hurt in his eyes was real, but so was the refusal to own what he had done. In that moment, I realized there would be no reconciliation before the wedding. Maybe not after either. The line had been drawn, and he had chosen his side. As the final days ticked down, Edward's excitement became almost boyish. He insisted on polishing his shoes until they gleamed, rehearsing his bow, even practicing how he would hand me to James at the altar. "I don't want to stumble," he said. "Not when the whole church is watching." "You won't," I assured him. "And even if you do, it will only prove how hard you tried." The night before the wedding, he slipped a small box into my hand. Inside was a locket that had belonged to my grandmother engraved with her initials. "She would want you to have this," he said, "and she would want to be here proud as ever." I clasped it around my neck, feeling the cool metal against my skin. "She is here," I whispered, and for the first time, I believed it. The morning of the rehearsal, the church bells rang faintly in the distance. Edward and I stood at the back of the sanctuary practicing our walk. Each step echoed in the empty hall, a preview of the moment to come. My father hadn't arrived yet. He had said he might, though I suspected he wouldn't. Sophie hadn't spoken to me in days. The air was charged with inevitability. I looked at Edward, his posture proud, his eyes shining. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" I asked. He smiled. "I've been ready for this since the day you were born." On the morning of the wedding, I woke before the alarm caught in that bright trembling pocket of silence that comes just before a storm. Durham's sky was the gentle gray that makes colors look more honest. I sat up and touched the locket Edward had given me the night before. The metal had warmed to my skin like a hand I could hold without asking. Downstairs, I found him at the kitchen table in his new navy suit, already polished, and pressed a napkin folded into precise thirds beside his coffee. He rose when he saw me a little too fast, as if to steady me, and then steadied himself on the chair instead. "Good morning, beautiful bride," he said the words soft and proud. "Good morning, Granddad." I poured us both water and checked my bouquet list for the 100th time. It felt like superstition now: touch the stems, count the ribbons, make sure the corsage pin is where it belongs, as if good order could guarantee a gentle day. He reached for my hand across the table. "We made it." "We did?" I said, and then, because the truth deserved a place at the table too, I added, "No matter what happens today, you've already given me what I needed." "What's that?" he asked. "A father," I said. He didn't speak for a moment. He just squeezed my hand the way he had when I was 8, and the world felt like something I had to survive. St. Andrew's Church waited with its red brick shoulders and white steeple, the doors still closed to the guests. The bridal room smelled like hairspray and steam. Pale dresses fanned across a rack like quiet clouds. Maya, my maid of honor, was a calm storm of competence, pinning a small spray of baby's breath to my hair and keeping the playlist on the low, steady songs that let your lungs remember how to work. On the armchair near the window, my mother's veil lay folded under tissue paper, the lace catching light, as if it still knew how to glow. "You ready?" Maya asked, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "I think so," I said. "In the ways that matter." She kissed my cheek, and then conspiratorially checked her phone. "James and the groomsmen are lined up. Reverend Matthews is running through the final notes with the organist. Your cousins are in their places." And she hesitated. Martin is here. Third pew center aisle. I breathed in. Out. The locket was sturdy against my sternum. Okay. From the other side of the door came the quiet bustle of a church, filling with people, coats shrugged from shoulders, handbags planted in pews, pages of programs turned and tapped. Somewhere, a child laughed, that high bell sound that makes everything feel less fragile. A soft knock. Come in, I said. Reverend Matthew stepped into the room carrying an air of kind authority. Everyone's ready. Do you need anything from me, Amelia? Just the truth, I said. He smiled. That we have prepared. He glanced at Edward and nodded reverently. How are you feeling, Mr. Whitmore? Like a man who's about to do what he should have been doing all along, Edward replied. His voice had that crisp edge it got when he was certain. Then let's begin, the Reverend said, and left us to our last few breaths before the door opened to the aisle. The processional unfolds in beats you can count with your bones. First, the seating of the families, the rustle of satin as people settle. Then the organ lifts its voice. The groomsmen march in shoulders-squared expressions half serious from the weight of the moment. The bridesmaids drift like watercolor. The last of them, Maya, turns at the front and gives me a little nod that says now. The church doors open. Sound and light rush in together. The old wood takes the music and turns it into a ribbon that runs the length of the nave. Every face rises like a field of flowers turning toward us. At my side, Edward offers his arm not as a formality, but as a promise. Ready, my girl, he whispers. I've been ready since I found my voice, I say, and we step forward. We walk. It is not a long aisle, but it is long enough to live an entire small life in. I notice too much and exactly enough the polish on Edward's shoes, the way his breath keeps a drummer's time, the shift of afternoon light across the stained glass. On the third pew, Martin sits with his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white with effort. His eyes find ours and falter, then find us again, as if the act of looking is a test he keeps failing. On the far side of the aisle, Sophie sits in a dress that photographs well and forgives nothing. Her jaw is set in that way it gets when she's losing an argument. She doesn't look directly at me. She scans the faces, auditing the reactions, measuring her place in them. At the altar, James waits with a face as open as a door. I didn't know you could adore someone more in front of 100 people than you do in an empty kitchen, but love on some days scales. Edward and I stop before the first step. Dearly beloved, says Reverend Matthew's voice warm enough to hold, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Amelia Carter and James Whittaker in marriage. He looks out over the congregation. His eyes rest briefly on Edward, then me. Amelia is escorted today by Mr. Edward Whitmore, her beloved grandfather, and the father figure who raised her with unconditional love. It's a single sentence, and it's the loudest thing I've ever heard. The church's air shifts. You can feel 100 spines straighten at once. There's a soft, collective exhale murmurs that are not gossip but agreement, like a verdict the room delivers without speaking. Maya's hand comes to her mouth. In the third pew, Martin's shoulders inch forward like the words had weight, and they found the softest place to land. Edward squeezes my arm, and for an instant, I am 6 again, standing on a stool in the kitchen while he teaches me to whisk eggs without splashing. I am 10 again, dripping mud across the porch with a soccer trophy in my hand. I am 16, crying in a car in a thunderstorm, and he is telling me the roads home better than any GPS. The aisle and every hallway we ever walked together collapse into this step. Who presents this woman to be married to this man? The Reverend asks. Edward draws himself up, chin steady. On behalf of our family, he says I do, with joy. It is not a formula, it is a benediction. He lifts my hand and places it in James's. The exchange is simple. One hand finds another and stays. But beneath it is a ledger, every late-night pickup, every clap from a hard-wooden bleacher, every I'm here when here meant carrying more than his year should allow. Edward steps to the front row and takes the seat that in other families is reserved for the father of the bride. No one disputes it. No one would dare. Vows are promises that slice time in half. Before you say them, you're walking toward something. After you are standing inside it, James goes first. He keeps his paper folded in his palm like a secret and looks up more than he looks down. He talks about listening, about the 1,000 small kindnesses that make a life, about showing up not as a grand gesture, but as a daily choice. When he says, "I choose you" in the mornings when we are tired, and in the nights when we are afraid, a little tremor runs through the church like a chorus of yeses that don't need to be voiced. I read my next. I keep them short because the longer I speak, the more likely I am to fall apart. I say that love is attention, and I promise to pay attention. I say that home is a practice, and I promise to practice. I say that we will build a family by showing up for one another in ordinary rooms on ordinary days, because those are the days that build a life. When I finish, James's eyes are wet, and Maya is openly crying, and Edward has both hands tented before his mouth, like he's afraid the joy will leak out if he lowers them. We exchange rings. The metal is cool, and then it is warm. The Reverend pronounces us married, and the organ surges. We kiss briefly, carefully, then laughing, because careful is never how we do anything together. The church laughs with us the way a room does when it has decided to love you. The recessional feels like a movie we get to star in without being famous. We walk back down the aisle into a shower of smiles and nods and small whispered congratulations. People rise. The pews become a river we wade through. At the back in the narthex, the receiving line forms James's parents first, and then my family, which is to say, the people who stayed. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Henderson, our former neighbor, says, taking Edward's hands, "You did beautifully." "The honor was mine," he replies, voice still edged with awe, as if he can't quite believe that dignity can feel this gentle. Cousins embrace him. Old friends shake his hand like the handshake itself is an award. The compliments collect around him until he looks a little dazed, like a man caught in a pleasant storm. When Martin reaches us, he stops unsure of which face to address first. It is the closest we have stood all day. He looks at James and nods, offers a quiet, "Congratulations," then turns to me and opens his mouth. He closes it again. He tries once more and finds a single sentence. "I'm proud of you," he says. I want the words to land somewhere easier than they do. They find the part of me that is still a child, still tilted toward the chance of being chosen, and that part presses its ear to the door, listening for footsteps that never quite arrive. I nod once carefully. "Thank you for coming," I say. He swallows glances at Edward, who is receiving yet another hug from someone who claims him as family, and steps aside. If shame has a posture, it might be what I see in his shoulders as he retreats the rounding of a man who has not just lost a moment, but a place. Sophie approaches next, her smile fixed and bright like a light you put on for photographs. "Lovely ceremony," she says. Her eyes are glass. Very moving. "Thank you," I say. She leans in as if to kiss my cheek, and then chooses not to. "I hope you know what you've done," she whispers, and the words are meant to wound. I let them meet the locket, not my skin. "I do," I answer and turn to the next guest. Outside, the light has stretched to gold. Bells ring somewhere distant. The smell of cut grass wanders over from the churchyard. James and I pose for photos with the bridal party under the maple trees. In one of them, Edward stands between us, his hands resting lightly on our shoulders, and I think this is the closest thing to alchemy I have ever seen. Sorrow turned to steadiness, absence turned to presence, the past turned to a form of blessing. We do the formal photos next James's family, then mine. For hours, the photographer hesitates for a second, unsure how to assemble what we are. I solve it for him. "Edward in the center," I say, "please." He smiles, grateful for instructions, and arranges us so that the truth is impossible to miss. When I glance back toward the church steps, Martin is there, half in shadow, head tilted toward the ground, as if reading an inscription only he can see. Maya sidles up beside me during the bouquet shuffle. "You okay?" I am, I say, surprised to realize it is wholly true. The ache is there. Ache is honest, but it sits beside something larger. Relief, maybe. Or the clarity that comes when you stop asking a locked door to open. "Then let's go make you late to your own reception," she grins. "One more minute," I say, and slip away to where Edward is catching his breath near the low stone wall along the walk. "You were perfect," I tell him. He chuckles. "I nearly missed a step on the fourth pew. Your grandmother would have teased me for a week." "She would have cried first," I say, "then teased you." He looks toward the steeple eyes shining. I felt her. So did I. We stand there in the warm light for a breath and a half, the kind you could live inside if you knew how to hold still long enough. Then the car honks gently, the driver reminding us that the next chapter has a schedule. We gather bouquets and programs and each other. As we make our way to the waiting sedan, Guests wave, and the church doors yawn and close as people spill out carrying the story with them, the way people carry songs they can't stop humming. At the curb, James squeezes my hand, ready for what I ask teasing. For the part where we get to dance with whoever raised us, he says, eyes smiling. I laugh, then glance back one more time. Martin stands at the edge of the steps, half turned toward the parking lot. He looks smaller than he did, or maybe just farther away. Beside him, Sophie taps a message into her phone, fury coiled into her thumbs. I touch the locket. Yes, I say to James. I'm ready. We slide into the car, the door thunks shut, and the city's afternoon gathers itself for the next thing. As we pull away, I watch the church shrink in the rear window until it becomes the size of a keepsake, a thing you can put on a mantle and point at when you need to remember. The reception waits at Riverside Hall, its windows already strung with soft light. Inside that glow, the night has plans, speeches, and toasts, questions and answers, a dance that will redefine a tradition and a conversation at the edge of the room that might change the shape of a family forever. But for now, there is the road between. There is the hand in mine. And there is the quiet certainty that the truth once named out loud can hold its own in any room. Riverside Hall glowed like it had been taught to be kind to faces. Strings of light stitched the windows, the band tuned in soft, agreeable notes. Place cards lined the head table, and in the center seat, the one tradition reserves for the father of the bride, sat Edward Whitmore upright and modest, the napkin already folded neatly in his lap. Martin took a place at table 7 with Sophie. No one told him to sit there. No one needed to. Dinner came with relieved laughter. Maya's toast landed first, a ribbon of quick humor, and a catch in her voice at the end. James's father followed, telling a gentle story about the first time he realized his son had found the person who made ordinary days feel like something to look forward to. Then it was my turn. I stood with the glass in my hand and the locket cool against my collarbone. I don't have a traditional father of the bride speech I began, but I do have something to say to the person who did the job. I turned to Edward. You taught me that love is attention, that showing up is a verb, not a headline. You sat through rain and school plays and hard years. You did it quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Tonight, I want the quiet to have a microphone. I lifted my glass. To my grandfather, my steady place. Thank you. The room answered with a long-standing applause that was more blessing than noise. Edward pressed the napkin to his eyes, laughed once at himself for doing it, then stood because the moment asked him to. I never wanted a title, he said when the room settled. I only wanted to be useful. Thank you for letting an old man be useful. It could have ended there, perfect and simple. But the bandleader tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the next tradition is the father-daughter dance, he said, then looked at me for the cue we had rehearsed. Tonight, we invite the bride to dance with her grandfather, Edward Whitmore, who walked her down the aisle. There was a soft, collective, oh, not surprise exactly, but a sound people make when a thing aligns. The opening bars of Moon River found the floor. Edward stood a touch stiff, and I met him at the edge of the lights. When his hand settled into mine, the noise of the room receded, and we moved the way people do when they're trying to memorize something as it happens. You remember your grandmother humming this, he said. Feet careful, pride unhidden. I do, I said. She always skipped the sad lines. He smiled. We won't need them tonight. We turned once, twice. In the corner of my eye, I caught Martin elbows on the table, watching the way a man watches a window he wishes he had remembered to open. Sophie stared at her phone, then up, then down again. The song slowed. We spun gently to a stop. The room cheered in that warm way that tells you people are on your side. Edward kissed my forehead. That'll do, he murmured, and handed me back to the evening. I was halfway to my seat when Martin stepped into my path. He didn't ask for the spotlight. He didn't even ask for the floor. He kept his voice low enough that it belonged to us. I was wrong, he said. Not just about today, about a lot of days. I thought keeping peace meant giving in to the loudest need. I confused quiet with strength and forgot that yours was the kind that didn't demand anything. He swallowed. I gave away a place I should have protected. I don't know how to get it back. There was a time when I would have answered for him, offered a bridge, and built it myself. I didn't do that now. You can't get this back, I said, and let the accuracy sit between us. But you can start telling the truth and then live like it's true. That's the only way anything changes. His eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen since I was small. Would you let me try? I'll let you try where trying doesn't erase what other people earned, I said, glancing toward Edward, who was laughing with James about a dance step he'd improvised and gotten away with. We can talk next week. He nodded once, the exact size of a first step, and returned to table 7. Sophie touched his sleeve, asked something in a sharp whisper. He shook his head and didn't answer. The night loosened its collar. The band found the up-tempo songs. James and I were pulled to the floor, then away for photographs, then back again. People who had known me since grade school spun me under strings of light and told stories about how I had once rescued a class goldfish and insisted on a proper funeral. People who'd only met Edward today lined up to shake his hand, and each time he seemed a little surprised to find himself so loved in public. Before the cake, Great Aunt Helen, keeper of family lore, claimed the microphone. I have lived long enough to know 2 things, she announced. You are not what people call you. You are what you do. And tonight we all saw who does what love requires. She raised her fork like a gavel. Let the record show we noticed. Laughter, then a cheer. Near the end. When this room had softened to low lights, and the last circle of dancers, I found Sophie alone by the drinks table. The gloss had left her smile. She looked tired in a way makeup can't fix. You got what you wanted, she said, not quite bitter, not quite curious. No, I answered. I stopped pretending I didn't know what I already had. She considered that, then looked past me to our grandfather, who was telling Maya a story with his hands and a grin. He was there for you, she said, and for a second the sentence didn't carry an accusation. He still is, I said. There's room for more than one person to show up. She didn't reply. She put down her glass and left before the last song. We ended, as receptions do, a tunnel of sparklers out front, a driver who had learned patience, a car, with a trunk full of flowers someone insisted I take. At the curb, Edward hugged James, then me. His heartbeat under my cheek was steady as the old clock in the house we had shared. I didn't become your father tonight, he said softly. I just stopped being the only one who knew. I think everyone knows now, I said. He chuckled, then let them remember. He tapped his walking stick against the sidewalk once light as punctuation and waved us off. Weeks later, a framed photo sits on our mantel. Edward and me in the aisles bright, Wash's hand set over mine like a signature. The locket hangs beside it, catching morning sun. Sometimes the house is loud with friends. Sometimes it's quiet enough to hear our own kindnesses. Martin comes by on Sunday afternoons, now no fanfare, no promises larger than what he can carry. He sits with Edward and listens more than he speaks. Some losses don't return. Some rooms get warmer anyway. When people ask about the wedding, I tell them what mattered. We told the truth out loud. We made a tradition make room. We walked down an aisle and into a life where love keeps showing up even when it has to learn how. And that is the ending we chose. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.